Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with you-know-who, Finster. Hey, Finster. How you doing, kiddo? You're good? Yeah, you're a good girl. Yes, here with Finster. She's way up there. There we are, here with 16 great works their composers never heard performed because they were dead for the most part. Yeah, they were not in good shape. They really weren't. And here we go. You ready? This is a very interesting list, actually. There's some really cool stuff here. Yes, there is, first of all, Bach's B minor Mass. Now, a lot of the B minor Mass consists of music that Bach wrote for other purposes. Therefore, he heard quite a bit of it, but he never heard the work as he assembled it as the B minor Mass. It was never performed that way in his lifetime, and never would have been, because there was never an occasion to. The Lutheran Church did not need a complete Latin Mass. That's not the way they did the Mass, and the Catholics certainly wouldn't have been interested, and you couldn't do it as a concert work. And so it didn't get played until well after Bach was no longer with us, which is kind of shocking when you consider what an iconic piece it is today. Really amazing. Then we must talk about the Mozart Requiem. Of course, Mozart never finished it, and a lot of what we hear today is not by Mozart at all. It's by Süssmayr or somebody else, who, Robert Levin, someone who decides to complete it in whatever way they decide to complete it. So Mozart obviously never heard it, although fragments were performed right after his death. I mean, it was, immediately popular. And it just blows me away, because I've always said, there are so many works that composers completed and they didn't hear. And here's the one that is like the iconic incomplete work. And I don't really like the piece. I really don't. Never have. I'm not going to, but it must be on the list. Of course it has to be on the list. Of course, if he'd lived to complete it, he might have heard it. It wasn't written for himself. Remember, it was a commission. It was a commission by Count, Wapaschlumpa, whatever his name was, who was, going to pass it off as his own work, as a requiem for his late wife, or the wife he was about to kill, or however it worked out. Anyway, much more interesting to me than the Mozart Requiem is Haydn's opera, Orfeo ed Euridice, also known as L'anima del filosofo, the soul of the philosopher. This was a full-fledged four-act opera composed in 1791 as part of Haydn's first visit to London. The king, King George III, refused permission to perform it. He was in a fight with his son, the Prince of Wales. And remember, King George III was insane on the best of days, and the Prince of Wales wasn't much better. And they had rival opera companies, and they were fighting with each other, or something like that was going on. In any case, Haydn spent a lot of time and effort writing a full-fledged four-act opera that was never performed. In fact, it was only premiered, get this, he wrote it in 1791. It was premiered in 1951 in a performance led by Erich Kleiber and starring Maria Callas. Whoa! Isn't that something? I think there's a pirate recording of it circulating somewhere, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, since then it has been recorded a few times. It's quite a good opera, and it has a tragic ending. I mean, it ends quietly with, Orpheus being ripped to pieces. This actually happens in the story. No happy anything there. Anyway, it's a terrific piece. And it's richly scored. It's got 2 oboes and 2 English horns and clarinets and trombones and harp and all kinds of stuff in it. And nobody knows it. Of course. Of course not. Rather nifty, though. Beethoven, the Missa Solemnis. Beethoven heard 3 movements of it. Possibly. Well, Beethoven really wasn't hearing anything at that point, but 3 movements were performed in Beethoven's lifetime, but the complete work wasn't done until after Beethoven passed away. Well, actually, I believe the premiere happened in St. Petersburg, Russia. So Beethoven was hardly in a position to see it. And it really is, it wasn't done very much at all, because it was considered to be sort of unperformable after those initial performances of bits, or the whole thing, the one version of the whole thing. It wasn't until well after Beethoven's death that it became a repertory item. Berlioz Les Troyens. Well, the work was never performed as Berlioz originally wrote it. He had to break it up into two different operas to try and get them performed at the Paris Opera, which was the only place that would even consider it. So that was a very depressing experience for poor old Berlioz. Again, it was only until well after his death that the complete work was reassembled and played in the form in which Berlioz intended it, at which point it was revealed to be one of the great works of music drama of the 19th century, right up there with like Wagner's things and whatnot. It's a stunning, fabulous opera. I remember seeing it at the Met. It was so exciting. It moves very quickly, and it's really, really thrilling. So, yeah, it's really a shame that Berlioz never lived to hear what he actually wrote, or at least all of it, in, a single evening. Next, Bruckner, Symphonies 5 and 9. Well, 9 we all know about because it was incomplete and Bruckner died before it was finished, and so it couldn't be performed in its three-movement existing form until after Bruckner's death. But what was even more interesting is that he never heard the fifth. He heard a piano run-through of it at one point, but the actual premiere in a Baudelairized, reorchestrated version was given somewhere not in Vienna, and it was never otherwise performed in his lifetime in a place where he could actually hear it. Fascinates me because it's his craziest symphony, and you can't imagine him changing anything. Thank God, probably he didn't hear it, so he couldn't revise it. And hey, yeah, so that was actually probably a good thing because it preserved one of his most original creations in its most original form. Rimsky-Korsakov's The Golden Cockerel, his last opera, would never have passed the censors in Russia because it was, rather critical of the monarchy, and it wasn't premiered until after Rimsky's death in a Baudelairized version that had changed the text around to make it more acceptable to the Russian censors. Everyone knows the suite, everybody loves the music, and Rimsky never heard it, which is kind of amazing. Mahler, Das Lied von der Erde, and the Ninth Symphony. That is amazing. When you consider that Mahler was probably the greatest symphonic orchestrator that ever lived, and he wrote these pieces and he never heard them. And they are two of the most amazing bits. It's not boring. Not a bit. Two of the most amazing bits of orchestration you have ever heard in your life. Really astounding. And he never heard them. Either of them. Wow. Blows my mind. It really does. Ives, Symphony No. 4. Well, Ives didn't hear most of what he wrote. Yes, dear. Okay. Ives did not hear most of what he wrote. And because, you listen to it and you know why. It was way ahead of his time and way out there. And getting performances was a very, very difficult thing, even though he had money and could afford to subsidize, some of the things that happened in publication of some of his stuff. But the Fourth Symphony was not premiered until Stokowski did it and recorded it in the 1960s. Even though it was really substantively complete by the 19-teens, which is kind of amazing. Janacek from The House of the Dead, his last opera. We got a bunch of operas here because, operas take a lot of time and expense and effort, and crazy avant-garde-ish type operas take even more time and expense and patience and special pleading. From The House of the Dead was basically complete when Janacek died. Charles Mackerras, I think, did a little pastiche fixing of a couple choruses in it, but basically it's done. And it was only premiered after Janacek finally passed away, and it is a masterpiece. It's an astounding piece of music. Remarkable. Puccini's Turandot we all know about. It was performed after Puccini died in a completion by Franco Alfano, except for the premiere where Toscanini laid down his baton and said, "This is where Mr. Pooch passed away." Yeah, so that was unfortunate, but it's since become a repertory item after all, and it's wonderfully gorgeous. And again, fascinating how fabulous these guys were at scoring music that they didn't even have a chance to listen to. Because, boy, Turandot is many things, but one thing it really is a fantastic piece of sonic imagery. Yeah, I know. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Berg's Lulu. It's another work where, remember, it was only performed in a 2-act version. The third act was complete, but not fully scored. And Berg's crazy wife, Helene, decided to hang on to it for like 30 or 40 years until Frederick Serha got his hands on it and finished orchestrating it so that it could finally be performed in like the 1970s or something like that, like 40 years after Berg died. Kind of amazing. Absolutely amazing. He did extract the Lulu Symphony from it, a bunch of orchestral bits which were performed before the complete opera. But other than that, nope, he never heard it. Schoenberg's Moses and Aron. Again, it was left incomplete. The third act was never completed. Schoenberg always intended to complete it, but he didn't get around to it before he died. And so the opera in its existing form wasn't performed until, I don't know, the 1960s, I think. I mean, 1951, Hermann Scherchen did The Dance Around the Golden Calf. That was the only bit of it that was ever played. And that was several years after Schoenberg had already passed away. Now it is, well, it's not exactly a repertory piece, but it has been successfully performed on numerous occasions. It's a wonderful work. It really, really is. And about 20 years ago or so, 30 years ago, Zoltán Koczysz was given permission by Schoenberg's heirs to actually complete the third act. Not even complete it, write the third act, which he did. And that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't think it's been recorded, but there is a completion out there. I don't think it's terribly helpful. It's simply a dialogue between Moses and Aaron about like the meaning of God and the universe and all that. And like, you know, it's not as much fun as the, orgy, around the golden calf. And of course, Aaron dies because Moses wins the argument. And then last but not least, Bartok, third piano concerto, which he wrote for his wife to have a work to play after he passed away. He was dying of leukemia. It's a very moving, very beautiful work. The central, was it Andante Religioso or Adagio Religioso? It's so beautiful. There were only the last, I think it was like 17 or 19 bars remained to be orchestrated when Bartok died. And that was a job that, I could have done. I mean, anybody could have done it. Who was it? Tibor Surly, I think, who assembled the viola concerto, actually completed it. And so it was performed after Bartok died. Posthumously, it was performed. It's a masterpiece, a fabulous, fabulous work that unfortunately Bartok never lived to hear. So there you have it, 16 great works that their composers never heard performed. If you have items that you want to add to the list, feel free, but note the title, Great Works by Great Composers. We're not talking about, something that, was left somewhere on somebody's desk by someone nobody cares about. Let's have some real meat and potatoes in your selections. In the meantime, thank you for joining me, Finster. That was very sweet of you. You were a good girl. Yes, you were. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks very much for joining me. Take care.